All right, First Chronicles 19. Let's call this one Before You Waste Time, because this is going to be another chapter helping us understand David's victories over some of his neighbors that didn't actually have to be enemies, but before the end of the chapter, we're going to find out that they would be. And those two nations are going to be Ammon and Syria. And the way they end up in conflict with David is quite possibly after David gets the kindness from King 2 that we saw in the last chapter and a few chapters back in chapter 14 from King Hiram. He may be encouraged to say, wait, let me actually, as we sometimes say, pay that forward. And so he is going to see the king of Ammon, recently having lost his father. And so David is actually going to send messengers to try to console the king of Ammon. But he is going to be another in a string of kings surrounded by what seems to be really bad advice. And so the advisors to the king of Ammon are basically going to challenge him to say, do you think that because David is sending messengers to console you, that he really means it? And instead of simply accepting the consolation, he is going to send them back basically abused, beards shaved and clothes cut in a way that seems like he might have actually sent them back almost naked, clearly exposed. And so David is going to tell the servants that have been sent back in shame, take a break until your beards grow back and you can go back to your families. But he's not going to do anything immediately. However, sometimes when we do wrong, we can expect consequences because our consciences are not clear. And so even though the king of Ammon is not facing conflict, he is actually going to escalate because he's not going to want to wait for a response from David. And so he is going to take what seems to be a large sum of money and hire troops and chariots and another army, part or maybe all of that army being the Syrian army. It's not completely clear from the chapter, but it's clear that the Syrians are a part of the army who he hires to go out and fight against David. And so when David gets word that the Ammonites are approaching, it's actually going to seem like the Ammonites only are approaching, because as he sends Joab out to battle, Joab is going to realize that he is actually surrounded and fighting on two fronts. And so he is going to divide up his forces, and it's not going to matter because Joab is going to be able to defeat the combined forces of Ammon and Syria. However, Syria is going to get reinforcements from Damascus, which is going to provoke David to come out himself to battle. And that is going to prove to be enough for Israel to defeat both the armies of the Ammonites and the Syrians, understanding that there is one crucial point at which Ammon still could have pivoted away from conflict, understanding that they took a large sum of money to hire the Syrian army. Two, the king that made peace with David took a large sum of money and made it a gift to David. And even though there didn't seem to be any bad blood between them, Ammon could have at least taken a shot at creating the peace in a situation that had not yet turned into war. And two wasn't the only one. Hiram was another king who was able to make peace with David by using not only kindness, but a gift to help broker the peace. And so Ammon, potentially even after insulting David's servants, might have still been able to live peacefully alongside Israel as its neighbors, if Ammon at least tried to follow in the pattern of those neighbors who lived peacefully with Israel. However, they hired the Syrians, who are even more puzzling in this situation because they don't seem to have had any problem with David at all, but simply chose to fight for money without regard to whether or not Ammon was dragging them into a fight that was right to get into in the first place. And so it may be quite likely that the Ammonites sought help from the Syrians because the Syrians had a history of being good at fighting. But as we mentioned before, when you're winning, integrity can seem super square, but how long can you really keep winning without it? And so in choosing to escalate the conflict with David and Israel, the king of Ammon did not simply waste time. He wasted a lot of that time in needless anxiety, understanding that David really did mean well. And beyond that, he ended up wasting money, understanding that the money he spent paying the Syrians to go fight, he could have potentially been paying to David to make peace, understanding that David had been more than willing to make peace with other neighbors who had sent him a kind gesture and a gift in the past. And even worse, even though Ammon and especially Syria had the opportunity to approach David in a way that would have let them live alongside Israel as its neighbors in peace, they end up starting a war that made them Israel's servants.